Little hen who lived in a chicken yard with a lot of her other friends. And every day she would go out and she would scratch. And if you've ever seen a chicken out in the yard, when I was a little girl, I lived on a farm and I used to watch the chickens. And they would get your little claws. Can you do that? And they would scratch, but they did not look down while they were scratching. They just look around. And then they stopped scratching and they scratched up something like a grain of wheat or some corn or a nice fat juicy worm. They would go and eat it. Well, that was what Henny Penny was doing. She was underneath a big old, I forgot to ask you this. Raise your hand if you would like to tell what kind of a tree acorns grow on. What do you think?
An oak tree?
Exactly. And that's where she was. She was scratching, scratching under the oak tree, and all of a sudden along came a great big puff of wind, and it went through the leaves of the tree, and the leaves on the tree went shaking and shaking, and the limbs went shaking, and a little acorn fell down out of the tree and hit her on her silly head. And I forgot to tell you about Henny Penny. She was silly. She had a problem. When anything happened, she would flap her wings. Can you picture wings? And you might have seen them, that she ran around the chicken yard just squawking and cackling and carrying on and just getting so excited. Her friends would say, Henny Penny, calm down. Calm down. Raise your hand if somebody's ever told you to calm down. It's kind of hard. She tried not to act so silly. But when that acorn came, and can you do like this? Hit her on her head, she said, oh no, what was that? And she started to run around the chicken yard. She started squawking and carrying on. She stopped. She says, oh, isn't it awful? If the sky fell on us, it would just be so terrible. What am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. She said, I know what I'm going to do. The king, he's very smart. I don't know what to do, but he's very smart. I'm going to go to the king's palace and tell him that the sky's falling. Then he'll be able to figure something out. I know, oh, this is so awful. I've got to hurry. And she hurried right out to the king's palace to tell him that the sky was falling. Well, she hadn't gone very far when she met Cocky Locky. That was his name. And you know the reason they call him Cocky Locky? Because he was a rooster. Because early in the morning, before the sun even got halfway up, he would start saying cock-a-doodle-doo. And that's a really true part of this story, because I lived on a farm when I was little, and we didn't have air conditioning. And early in the morning, before the sun came up, those roosters out in that yard, they'd be cock-a-doodle-doo. And that's why they called him talk. And he said, Henny Penny, where are you going in such a hurry this morning? And Henny Penny said, I'm going to go to the king's palace to tell him that the sky is falling. I should know. For a piece of it just fell and hit me on my silly head. And so Cocky Locky said, I've never been to the king's palace, and I've never seen the king. May I go with you? And Henny Penny said, certainly you may. So, help me tell it. Henny Penny, say that with me. Henny Penny and Cocky Locky set out to the king's palace to tell him that the sky was falling. Well, they hadn't gone very much further when they met Ducky Lucky. And she said, where are you going in such a hurry this morning? And Henny Penny said, we're going to the king's palace to tell him that the sky is falling. I should know. For a piece of it just fell and hit me on my silly head. And Ducky Lucky said, I've never been to the king's palace, and I've never seen the king. May I go with you? And Henny Penny said, certainly you may. So, tell it with me.
Henny Penny,
Cocky Locky, and Ducky Lucky all set out to the king's palace to tell him that the sky was... Can you wait just a little while? Whatever you want to tell, wait a minute, okay? And so they hadn't gone very much farther when they met Loosey Goosey. And she said, where are you going in such a hurry? And Henny Penny said, we're going to the king's palace to tell him that the sky is falling. I should know. For a piece of it just fell and hit me on my silly head. And so Lucy Goosey says, I've never been to the king's palace. Can I go with you and see the king? And Henny Penny said, certainly you may. So, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Lucky, and Lucy Goosey all set out to the king's palace to tell him that the sky was falling. They hadn't gone very much farther when they met Turkey Lurkey. He said, where are you all going in such a hurry? And Henny Penny said, we're going to the king's palace to tell him that the sky is falling. I should know, for a piece of it just fell and hit me on my silly head. And so Turkey Lurkey said, I've never been to the king's palace, and I've never seen the king. May I go with you? And Henny Penny said, certainly you may. So, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Lucky, Lucy Goosey, and Turkey Lurkey all set out to the king's palace to tell him that the sky was falling. Well, they hadn't gone very much farther when they came to the deep woods. And there was a path through the woods, and so Henny Penny was leading the way through the woods. And as they were walking through the bushes and the trees, who should they see leaning up against a tree, just kind of relaxing and chilling? But Foxy Loxy, you knew it, Foxy Loxy. And he said, where are you all going in such a hurry so early this morning? And Henny Penny said, we're going to the king's palace to tell him that the sky is falling. I should know, for a piece of it just fell and hit me on my silk head. And Foxy Loxy said, oh my, it's a very long way to the king's palace. You must have walked a long way already. And they had, they'd walked a while. And he says, you must be getting kind of tired. And they hadn't thought about it that much, but they were kind of getting a little tired. And he says, you must be getting very hungry. And they hadn't even, nobody thought about bringing any food with them. None of them had anything to eat. And they thought about, they were kind of getting a little bit hungry. He says, why don't you come with me to my den for dinner? And so Henny Penny said, certainly we will. And so Foxy Loxy led the way through the path of the dark woods, through the forest, and right behind him came Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Lucky, Lucy Goosey, and Turkey Lurkey. And he came to his den. Now it just happened that his den was underneath the roots of a big oak tree. And it had a little door that you opened up to go down into the den. Like if you ever go where they have cellars or basements, sometimes they have a door outside and you open the door and then you go down the steps into the basement. And he opened the door and he says, come right into my den. And so down the steps went Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Lucky, Lucy Goosey, and Turkey Lurkey, and last of all, Foxy Loxy. And then he did something very strange. He reached down into his pocket and he took a key and he locked the door. And Cocky Locky was watching him and he thought, and he kept on watching him. And Foxy Loxy went over to the cabinet. He opened the cabinet and he took out one plate, one spoon, one fork, one cup, one napkin, and some salt and pepper, and one great, big, long, shiny, sharp butcher knife.
Whoa, my dad has a butcher knife.
And Cocky Locky began to think, he only put one plate. And how many of them were there?
5.
6 in all, exactly, 6 in all. He didn't set the table for 6 people to eat.
Said for him to eat.
And Cocky Locky began to think, he didn't invite us here to eat dinner with him. He invited us here to be his dinner.